improve the quality of interviews and investigations. The work addresses both investigation of regular crimes and crimes committed in the context of Russia's war of aggression. In 2024, the Center for Human Rights partnered with JustGroup, a Ukrainian NGO dedicated to evidence-based research within the criminal justice sector, and to develop solutions to move towards a fair, efficient, and human rights-centered criminal justice system. The project is supported by the Nansen Support Program for Ukraine, managed by the Norwegian Agency for Development. JustGroup has shown strong commitment to advancing the use of investigative interviewing by offering structured training and collaborating with experts at both national and international levels. They have established a national coaching and expert team. They have set standards for investigative interviews, and they have developed a basic program to support these practices. Through the collaboration, Ukrainian investigators and prosecutors gain access to knowledge and training derived from well-established research in investigative interviewing. The aim is to ensure the highest quality of evidence for legal proceedings and to increase protection against wrongful convictions, abuse of power, and torture, strengthening Ukraine's practices to be in line with international human rights standards and best practice. The Norwegian Centre for Human Rights provides training and guidance in interviewing and investigation methods in accordance with international standards and fair trial principles. And the Norwegian Police University College, the Norwegian National Criminal Investigation Service, as well as British colleagues contribute resources to this project. So with this, I'm really delighted to open this seminar and then to give the floor to my distinguished Ukrainian colleague. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Dear colleagues, dear friends, Ukraine warmly welcomes this seminar on investigative interviewing, a paradigm shift for Europe and towards accountability for Ukraine. The very title captures something fundamental. Accountability begins not only in courtrooms, but at the crime scene and in the interviewing room. Fair trial principles must be embedded from the very first procedural step. For Ukraine, this is not an abstract reform debate. As we investigate thousands of ordinary crimes and war crimes committed by Russian Federation in this court in the course of this unprovoked full-scale invasion, the quality, integrity, and human rights compliance of investigative interviewing are essential. Evidence must be reliable. Testimony must be lawfully obtained. Justice must be both done and seen to be done. The shift from confession-oriented practices to research-based, rights-respecting information gathering strengthens not only individual cases, but public trust, democratic resilience, and the rule of law itself. In times of war, adherence to human rights standards is not a luxury. It is a statement of who we are as European democracy. We are grateful to Norway for its consistent support and to the Council of Europe for its normative leadership. The ongoing cooperation demonstrates how standards, expertise, and practical implementation can come together to ensure progress on the ground. Ukraine remains committed to aligning its investigative practices with the highest European standards, because accountability is not only about responding to aggression, but also safeguarding the democratic future of our country and Europe as a whole. I thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I'm really happy to give the floor to Asbjørn Rachlew. He is working at the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights, but he is also has a very strong and long background from Norwegian police. And he's also the Norwegian member of CPT. So with that, Asbjørn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you, ambassadors, for the opportunity for me to present the concept of investigative interviewing here at the Council of Europe. But the turnaround operation from confession-oriented interrogation techniques to research-based investigative interviewing, it requires a change of mindset. we have to teach our detectives to think differently. We have to provide them with knowledge and methodology that stimulates them to generate and actively test alternative hypotheses, not pursuing information confirming their beliefs of guilt. Now, of course, torture is a blunt breach of the presumption of innocence and all human rights. Psychological modifications like coercion and other deceitful techniques may not be as brutal as physical torture, but the mindset of the detectives is the same to secure its confessions. So if we want to change the police, we have to provide them with an alternative they find applicable. And that alternative, my dear friends, is investigative interviewing research and human rights-based investigative interviewing techniques. And I will now tell you a story. This is a very sad story. All Norwegians know it, of course, by heart. It started on the 22nd of July, 2011, in which our capital, Oslo, was struck by terror. Our government building was turned into a war zone. Unfortunately, the terror did not stop there. Anders Behring Breivik continued his killing spree to the island of Utøya, where he tried to kill and execute as many children and teenagers as possible. And we were not able to arrest him before he had executed 68 teenagers and children on the island. Now, you may think that this case was an easy case for the Norwegian police to resolve. The perpetrator was caught red-handed with a gun in his hand, blood on his hand, and you think that this was an easy case for us to solve. But then you don't know the case as we do. First, 10 minutes into the first interview on the island, electronically recorded, the terrorist said that what you have seen here today is not the operation. This is just the beginning. This is just firecrackers of what is to come. Terrorist cell 2 and 3 will activate anytime. And at this point in history, we had to take him serious. Very seriously, because this was carefully planned. He activated a ticking bomb scenario. Where is cell 2 and 3 and where will they strike again? Now, of course, this opens up the question for today. How should we interview the suspect? We have traveled around the world, as I will show you quite soon, and asked that question to many colleagues around the world. And some people stand up and say, we must torture him to protect the people. Now, the following day, Norway was, of course, in shock. This is our government gathered. And as I was called upon by the chief commissioner in Oslo to abandon my holiday to travel back to the headquarters of Oslo and take the role as the advisor to the interviews of Breivik, I listened to the radio, and our government communicated to the world that Norway tomorrow will be recognizable. Nobody can take from us our values or our democracy. So when I started the planning and preparation for the interviews of Breivik, I started, of course, with the message, what are our values when it comes to interviewing suspects? And of course, all countries, like Norway and all countries, we have, of course, our value embedded in the constitution law. Most countries have, of course, criminal procedure law, where we have Supreme Court rulings. We have instructions from the general prosecutor, etc. And of course, we all have our have our human rights, the conventions, in which these values are embedded. Now, in Norway, in addition to that, we had for 10 years introduced investigative interviewing and had our training program in which all these values are embedded into the training program. One thing, and there's nothing wrong with the law and the values. Wherever we travel, also with the CPT, the laws are usually up to the standards. Besides, we have the same, European convention law, etc. But one thing is the law. But the main task is, of course, to apply that law and operationalize the values that we believe in. And that was our task. And that is, of course, the task for the whole Europe. Now, Nina, a 10-year veteran at the homicide squad, she does not know all the human rights constitutions, etc., but she knows the methodology in which these rights are embedded as part of the procedure. And she applied them. Now, when I show this picture around the world, people don't, particularly other parts of the world, they don't believe it. But this is where we interview our children, they say. And I say, yes. Why do you interview your children in rooms like this? Yeah, because the children talk more. Oh, why do you think they talk? It is because it stimulates communication. And our goal in investigative interviewing is to gather as much accurate and reliable information as possible. And we know through 30 years of scientific research and now 25 years of practice that this kind of interviewing based on human rights and science is far more effective than all other alternatives developed by my colleagues around the world. This is the tiger chair from China. I've sat in it many times. But it's not only Far East or the different parts of the world. Our part also. This is how the Americans responded to terror, with torture. Now, we know that investigative interviewing, research-based, human rights compliant interviewing is far more effective when and if your aim is to gather as much accurate and reliable information as possible. Now, of course, Nina has testified also in the United Nations in New York about her interviews, and we've been and she said that in pressured situations, and this was heavy pressure, that the knowledge of having a methodology that she knows by heart and being able to follow the methodology helped her through these challenges tasks. Now, Nina, a brilliant homicide detective, an experienced one, she does not hold a PhD in forensic psychology or a master's degree, but she trusts and she knows through her training that all the available knowledge through science is embedded in the methodology that she has studied and understood and knows by heart. So with the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights, we have for 15 years traveled around the world and presented the research-based methodology. And for those of you who are familiar with the literature and the policing in general, you will recognize that the methodology we are teaching is, of course, based on the peace model, the British peace model. And of course, UK was the first country in the world that made the turnaround operation from experience-based, confession-oriented techniques. Together with the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights, as I said, we have been, and of course in close cooperation with the Norwegian Foreign Ministry, and also now also in close cooperation with the UK Foreign and Commonwealth offices, we have traveled around the world and trying now to inform my colleagues around the world that there is an alternative that is more effective and human rights compliant. What I want to do is just before we turn our eyes towards our friends in Ukraine, I want to tell you that we have experience in training police officers all over the world. This is the Vietnamese version. We've been to Vietnam for 10 years now. In the beginning, they were a bit hesitant, but after a while, they let us in People's Police Academy. And what we do when we travel abroad is that we identify key players. This is Hien, is a teacher at the police academy in Hanoi. He came up in the breaks and he said, can I borrow this book from you? I said, yes, absolutely. What's your name? And Hien. 6 years later, here Hien is talking to high-ranking police officers throughout the whole Vietnam, talking about false confessions. A topic that we could not even dare to talk about in the beginning. This is the Indonesian version. We do exactly the same. Here we are in Jakarta, Bareskrim, and Eko here is teaching his colleagues investigative interviewing in Indonesia. We have also traveled there for more than 10 years. And he's not only teaching, he's showing them and video recording his own interviews and telling his colleagues that investigative interviewing, rapport-based interviewing, works also in Indonesia. This is the Chinese version. We've been invited over to Beijing at least 4 times, and they are interested in the methodology. And they have master classes in investigations, and after the lectures, they come up to us and are very curious because this is a whole new world to them. We don't only talk to the police academies where we travel. This is the Renmin Law in Beijing. On our right is Zhang Lei, the professor at Renmin Law. The gentleman to the left in the middle, they told us and informed us he was the youngest Supreme Court judge in China's history. They are very interested in the topics that we are discussing today. Now, of course, there will be a long time before this is, should we say, embedded, hopefully, into practice in many areas of the world. But we have started and we are continuing, and also through the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture, as I will come back to. This has now been risen as a high priority topic. Let me take you inside the interrogation laboratory in the biggest police academy in the world, in Beijing. They trusted us and let us inside. And it is a laboratory in which is based on high technology, because they think if we cannot longer torture people to confess, how are we, should we find the truth? And what they do is that they are buying all this expensive equipment to try to get into the head of the suspect, all different kinds of lie detectors. Here I'm sitting in the tiger chair, and they ask me, how do you feel when you sit like this? My legs are handcuffed, my hands are handcuffed. You know, this is standard issue in China. They ask me, how do you feel? And I say, well, I don't think it stimulates communication. And they note down and then take notes, etc. But be aware, I have now 7 lie detectors pointed directly at me. What you see here is my bottom. If I fart, they will know. But I try to tell them that bullshit plus bullshit plus bullshit, it equals bullshit. None of these lie detectors work. There is no shortcut to the truth. So we have to teach them to think differently. And we do. And they want, this is the head of the interrogation laboratory in Beijing. He holds a PhD in neuropsychology. They are trying to get into the brain. And of course, this is business, and they will understand that these machines don't work. It's not the way. But there is an alternative. We can laugh of our friends or colleagues in Far East or whatever, but let me remind you that this is the Western response. So that we just align ourselves that these challenges that we are facing is not a problem in different parts of the world. It's also a huge problem in Europe. In Brazil, we are now working. We have a full-time employee he has now, and we have now, after having traveled forth and back 6-7 times, we have now changed the curriculum on all 27 police academies in one of the largest, shall we say, democracies in the world, in Brazil. From confession-oriented techniques to human rights compliant investigative interviewing techniques. In Thailand, we are working, and today one of our colleagues is actually currently working there on the ground with Royal Thai Police and the prosecution service and developing investigative interviewing training in Thailand. I want to show you also, this is the Arabic version. Some of you may draw familiar with the lady sitting here. And all of these are, we were invited back to Beirut. I've been in Beirut for training of police officers there many times. And now Suzanne Jabor, the former she was head of the SPT, Torture Committee for the United Nations. She, after the training, 1 week of training, of these men, there were no women there. I trained 120 detectives, all men. And then after the training, Suzanne asks, who wants to become a trainer in investigative interviewing? And they rush up to her table, trying to sign up, not realizing that they are signing up for more human rights training. But now, Vebjørn and their colleagues, this is the Ukrainian version of investigative interviewing. The first time I met colleagues in Ukraine was back in 2017 when I was invited to present the concept of investigative interviewing. And immediately after I presented the concept, our dear friend Yuriy came up to me and really hold me and said, Ukraine needs this. And ever since, we have stayed in close contact through extremely difficult times. But we have done some training together with JustGroup. Like I did with Yen, Yuriy is one of the key players. Because if you want to change a culture, you have to create the change from within the police. We can hammer down laws and etc., but the change has to come from inside. We have to identify agents of change. And Yuriy is certainly one of them, and now is a high-ranking, of course, officers. It is not possible without the JustGroup that we have a close cooperation with. Unfortunately, as you said, Vebjørn, the situation with the aggression and terrorizing our neighbors and our friends, we cannot, should we say, travel forth and back and hold extensive training as they want and as we want. But we are staying in touch through online services and our friends, not only Yuriy, but our friends in the field of investigative war crimes on the battlefield in Ukraine, those people who are responsible for gathering as much accurate and reliable information as absolutely possible for the day that when justice comes, we have documented the war crimes in a way that the courts in this city and all over the world can rely upon. And this is their extremely difficult task, and we are trying to do all we can to help them and assist them with training, methodology, and also technical equipment that will make their job, should we say, easier. And of course, when we travel around and when we introduced investigative interviewing in Norway on the turning of the century, I, as a, should we say, one of the trainers, had extremely help from the Council of Europe's standards from interviewing suspects. This is the 2002 standards, which says that the questioning of criminal suspects is a specialist task, which calls for specific training if it is to be performed in a satisfactory manner. Why do the Council of Europe say that in 2002? Well, it is because the CPT has experienced that even though interviewing victims witnesses, and suspects is our core job. Most of my colleagues around, also in Europe, have no training. Now, of course, we have plenty of training of shooting guns and driving cars. But our most important task, it's experience. Now, then the Council of Europe says that first and foremost, the precise aim of such questioning must be crystal clear. That aim is to gather and obtain accurate and reliable information. Now, they could have said, okay, that's the aim and finished, but they don't. The CPT goes on based on their experience and saying that the aim is not to obtain a confession from someone already presumed in the eyes of the interviewing officer to be guilty. Now, why do they say that? Because there are very few countries who has actually changed and done the paradigm shift from experience-based, confession-orientated techniques. Now, I did not use physical torture when I started in the police 35 years ago, but I certainly used coercion and manipulation combined with isolation. And the mindset, it's the same. Now, you may think that investigative interviewing is sometimes perceived as a soft approach, that it's not effective. That you just ask, did you do it? No, I didn't do it. Or thank you very much for showing it. No, we have a strategy. We teach our detectives how to operationalize the presumption of to operationalize the presumption of innocence with a strategy that makes us more effective. We teach our detectives in the planning and preparation stage to identify, of course, all potential evidence. Why have you arrested the suspect? Now, in the planning and preparation, before we meet the suspect, we step by step, we teach our detectives that, okay, so you have the fingerprint. I'm so sorry, Vebjørn, but you will now be the suspect in my case here. Pardon me, but let's say that there was a woman murdered here in Strasbourg, and your fingerprints is on the bed in which the murdered woman is placed. But Vebjørn says, and he is arrested, but Vebjørn says that I am innocent. I don't know this woman. I've never been to that place. I am innocent. But we have the fingerprints on the bed, all over the bed, in fact. Could he be innocent? Of course he can. What we teach our detectives now is to identify if he is innocent. There is an alternative explanation. There must be. Now, in the planning and preparation stage, we teach the detectives to sit down and identify these alternative hypotheses. You may have worked in a shop that sells furniture, or a moving company, or sold it at the second-hand market. We don't know. Now, why do we do this? This is to operationalize the presumption of innocence. Because if he is innocent, there must be an alternative explanation. And if the police have not identified this, and the case goes to court later on, and we have not identified these alternative explanations, he may come up with a story if he's guilty. But the most important part is, of course, that this stimulates the open-mindedness of the detective in a very effective way. Because if Vebjørn is guilty, and I have asked you, have you had any other jobs? Have you, I investigate the alternative explanations, and you say no. What about do you sell furniture? And I test all these alternative explanations, like Sherlock Holmes, the most famous detective in the world. Why is he? You can just show the shadow of him, and everybody on this planet knows who it is. Why? Because Doyle, of course, was very interested in, should we say, scientific thinking. And he makes sure that Sherlock Holmes always asks two questions. What may have happened? This is a good opening, but it's not enough to debias our police. We force our police with the methodology to say, before we start the interview, what else may be the explanation? Now, when you have identified these alternatives, then we start gathering information and testing the hypothesis. And we do so before we present Vebjørn with the potential evidence. So we are exploring all possible explanations, testing the alternative hypothesis, and we delay the disclosure. So if you say, no, I've never had any other work, I've never sold any furniture, etc., I never worked in a furniture shop, etc., then when I have tested the alternative explanations, then and only then it is time for me to present, well, then Vebjørn, you must explain to me how the fingerprints may have landed on the scene of the crime. And if Vebjørn is guilty, it's very hard for him now to come up with an alternative explanation. We have a strategy today. When I started as a detective, we did not. Other than just trying to confirm. It's not effective. This is much more effective. And it's human rights compliant because we are teaching our detectives to stimulate their open-mindedness. We are teaching our detectives to look for evidence confirming his innocence. But if we cannot find such information, then it strengthens the case against the guilty suspect. And when my colleagues around the world gets it, it takes some time because we have to debias them the first 2 days because they think that their job is to get the confessions. But when they start to realize this methodology and thinking, they understand and they sign up for more training. Yeah. So what we do in effect is that we identify and then we test the plausible alternative explanations before we present the evidence. Yeah. In 2019, the CPT issued a new standard. It updated its 2002, should we say, standard, and informing Europe that investigative interviewing is a paradigm shift for Europe. And it is indeed. We have to teach not only our detectives, but the whole criminal justice system. The police, they act the way they do because confessions are saluted in our criminal justice system. And as long as prosecutors and judges turn the blind eye and look away, the police will continue. So the topic that we are gathered here for today and discuss is not only for the police, it's the whole criminal justice system that needs to change. And I think this is also one of the reasons why the Council of Europe, CPT, has called it a paradigm shift. And as you see, the standard now is based on investigative interviewing, the relevant science. And as you see, we have also included the strategic thinking by generating and teaching the detectives to generate and actively test the alternative hypothesis before disclosing potential evidence. So this is the methodology described in one paragraph. It is the peace model, but it is the enhanced peace model. The peace model was, investigative interviewing was launched 30 years ago. There has been research, there has been experiences, and knowledge is developing. And this standard from 2019 captures, should we say, all the research and embedded human rights. So by this introduction to the concept of investigative interviewing and how we together, not only with the Council of Europe, but certainly with partnership with practitioners on the ground in Ukraine, we will continue our work and visit Kyiv and our colleagues and do training there in about the month. and looking truly forward to it. But now I want to hand the floor over to my, should we say, former colleague of the CPT, who was responsible for providing Europe with this standard, not only based and founded on human rights, but based on the available scientific research that are there and knowledge. But most of my colleagues do not know about it. So our job is to provide them with that knowledge. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And Mykola, thank you very much for your leadership in the CPT and providing Europe with the highest standards possible that we know. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asbjørn, for this very, very inspirational introduction, or what should I say, lecture. But I'm so honored to give the floor now to the judge from Ukraine in the European Court of Human Rights, Mykola Gnatovskyy. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to be here with you today for many reasons, and not least, of course, because I am genuinely interested in the subject, but also because, as my friend Asbjørn has just mentioned, we have worked together on this topic for a while, and also I had the pleasure of actually discovering this paradigm shift indeed, and implementing it as much as possible into the standards of promoted by the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture. And it was indeed a great honor and a great pleasure. So I'll start by thanking once again very much the organizers of this wonderful event. I think that this joint Norwegian, first of all, of course, but also Ukrainian initiative that has brought us together is extremely important beyond the two countries and beyond the very grave and specific needs that Ukraine has in strengthening its capacity in investigating crime, including war crimes, but more generally in adapting its law enforcement system to the best European practices and standards. And for me, it is extremely nice also to recall that Ukraine has indeed been very receptive to the very idea of investigative interviewing from the very outset, since 2017, when Asbjørn started going to Ukraine on rather regularly, I would say. And also, I'm grateful to the Ukrainian colleagues that really almost appropriated this initiative, that made it their own, including already mentioned Yuriy Belousov, who is unfortunately not with us today in person, but I hope that he is with us online, and he will speak later today. He has had major roles in Ukraine as the first head of the Ukrainian National Preventive Mechanism, and then as a high-level prosecutor responsible for investigating torture and other forms of ill treatment. And I'm sure that in his current high administrative position, he is also very much interested in the subject and continues to promote it. I'm also grateful to the JustGroup. The people who are in the JustGroup, these are really amazing human rights activists, but also people who know how to produce impact on the ground. And I've worked with many of them even before the JustGroup was created. So Vasilina Yavorska in particular, I'm also sad that she is not with us in person here, but I'm sure that she will be following us and participating online. In my capacity as the CPT's president at the time when the initiative was being formed and gaining strength, I was very privileged to participate in the very first joint events. aimed at promoting the concept of investigative interviewing, both in Europe in general and concretely in Ukraine. I recall, I thought today that actually I think the first time we met with Asbjørn was not in 2017 when he came to Ukraine. I wasn't there at the time, but in 2018, in spring 2018 in Copenhagen, there was I think a very important seminar there, and Mr. Chetwynd was there with us, and a number of leading European experts in policing and in torture prevention. And I'm very glad to see that since then there has been a long way already covered, and a lot of positive things happened in the meantime. Today, also benefiting from my current perspective from the bench of the European Court of Human Rights, I will focus on the relationship between investigative interviewing practices and the prevention of police ill treatment in Europe, viewed through the lens of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights and the standards developed by the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture, by the CPT. And indeed, as you have seen from the excellent presentation that we have just had from Asbjørn, that the CPT fully embraced this concept and included it in its updated standards on the prevention of police ill treatment that were part of the CPT's annual general report for 2019. And since then, the CPT has consistently applied these standards in its ongoing dialogue with the member states of the Council of Europe. And the concept of the investigative interviewing has just been presented by Asbjørn, and he is the person to do it. So I think my role is rather to focus on why this approach has become so significant from the human rights perspective. And we have heard it not once that the investigative interviewing represents a genuine paradigm shift in European policing. And these are not just very sort of big words. These are, I think, this is a very accurate description of the essence of the concept and its impact on the prevention of violations of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the article that, as of course everyone who's gathered here today knows, presents one of the core values of any democratic society. The departure from the confession-oriented model of police questioning that has already happened in several European jurisdictions and hopefully will continue gaining terrain is, in my view, the major way and the best possible way to ensure that policing in Europe, that crime detection, crime investigation, and more generally the activities of law enforcement agencies are compliant with the human rights standards and with the dignity of the persons concerned. The model of modern investigative interviewing that has reversed the logic of confession-oriented model that emphasizes information gathering, evidence-based investigation, and professional communication rather than confrontational pressure has profound implications not only for the effectiveness of criminal investigations, but also for the protection of human rights in police custody. And today, my central argument is that the evolution of the case law of the European Court of Human Rights under Article 3 increasingly supports this paradigm shift. So it's not accidental that the key developments in the case law of the court broadly coincide in time with the development of the investigative interviewing model. The court's jurisprudence has progressively narrowed the space for coercive or confession-driven interrogation practices. In this sense, investigative interviewing can be understood as a policing method which is fully consistent with and indeed supportive of the court's standards of human rights. Now, where does the problem lie, and what question are we actually answering? Well, Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, as you know, prohibits torture, inhuman treatment, degrading treatment, or punishment. And it prohibits it in the most categorical terms. The prohibition is absolute, which applies in all circumstances regardless of the seriousness of the crime under investigation or the urgency of the situation. And the situation of persons in police custody is the one which needs to be addressed in the first place, because the persons in police custody run the highest risks of treatment which would run contrary to Article 3 of the Convention and as understood by the court and its case law. These are persons, their particularly vulnerable position is explained by the fact that they are under the direct control of state authorities, often and usually isolated from the outside world, and of course they may be exposed to intense investigative pressure, especially in the first hours of custody. And the CPT has identified throughout the decades of its work that it is the first hours of police custody which are the most risky from the point of view of risks of Article 3 violation. So in the case law of the court, there is a significant strand, line of case law which concerns events that take place in police stations, particularly during or around questioning. And the court over time developed a set of principles that strongly influence how police interrogations must be conducted. The first important developments, I would say, start in mid-1990s. The key starting point, in my view, would be Rebic versus Austria, the case that was decided by the European Court in 1995, in which the applicant alleged that he had been ill-treated by police officers while in detention, and the Austrian government argued that the injuries observed on the applicant might have resulted from his own behavior, namely from his active resistance to policemen. In its judgment, the court rejected this argument and articulated an important principle. When a person is injured while in police custody, it is for the state to provide a convincing explanation for those injuries. This reflects the court's recognition that detainees are in a position of vulnerability and dependence. Because the authorities exercise full control over the individual, the state bears a heightened responsibility to ensure that the person's physical integrity and dignity are respected. This has also marked the famous reversal of the burden of proof in situations where ill treatment is alleged whilst the person is under the complete control of the state agents. Just slightly before that, a few years before that, in 1992, in Tomasi versus France, the court made it clear that there's no justification for police violence. The case concerned allegations of severe physical treatment during police custody in the context of an investigation related to terrorism in Corsica. The authorities suggested that the difficult circumstances of the investigation should be taken into account. But the court firmly rejected this reasoning. It emphasized that the convention does not allow any justification for the use of violence against persons held in police custody. And even the fight against serious crime, such as terrorism, cannot diminish the protection afforded by Article 3. Another French case that has significantly influenced the development of the court's case law under Article 3, and namely the definition of torture, is the judgment in Salmouni versus France, 1999, the case which I think is extremely well known, in which the applicant had been subjected to repeated severe physical and psychological abuse while in police custody. The court held that this treatment amounted to torture. And actually, in that judgment, the court emphasized that the doctrine of the living instrument fully applies to issues of the prohibition of torture, meaning that the standards required by Article 3 evolve over time. In other words, the court made it clear that it will not hesitate to call torture torture when it faces it in the context of police custody. So as the society is developed and as our understanding of human rights and of the modern meaning of the European Convention on Human Rights developed, the expectations placed on law enforcement officials have become increasingly demanding. The practices that might previously have been tolerated could no longer be accepted. Therefore, the court's judgments reinforce the requirement that police officers conduct interrogations with professional restraint and respect for human dignity. And I will turn to two more recent cases, although they are also already, with the passage of time, quite old, where I think the necessity of the concept of investigative interviewing is particularly evident. One of them is Vebjørn versus Germany, the famous case of a ticking bomb scenario to which Asbjørn has referred in his presentation when talking about the interviewing of Mr. Breivik. In that case, in Vebjørn versus Germany, German police officers threatened the suspect with inflicting severe pain in order to obtain information about the location of a kidnapped child. At that time, they believed that the child might still be alive. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case. Nevertheless, the court held that the threat of torture itself constituted violation of Article 3. And this judgment strongly reaffirmed the absolute nature of the prohibition of ill treatment. Even in circumstances involving extreme investigative pressure and also pressure on the investigators, the need to protect life, coercive interrogation methods remained impermissible. As somebody who has taught human rights law for a long time, I can say that this case is perhaps one of the toughest to explain to students. But I think once we manage that, a very important barrier is already overcome. And finally, and at this particular moment in time, I think the most important development of the court's case law, which once again speaks strongly in favor of investigative interviewing, is the judgment in Bouygues versus Belgium, issued in 2015. That's the most recent landmark case in this area. The case concerned two brothers who were each slapped by a police officer while being questioned at a police station. Although the physical impact on the persons concerned, on the applicants, was minor, the court focused on the symbolic importance of respect for human dignity. And the Grand Chamber held that even a single slap inflicted on a person in police custody constitutes degrading treatment unless it is the treatment concerned is strictly necessary. And of course, slapping somebody who is completely under control cannot be considered as necessary under any circumstances whatsoever. So the court has introduced a very high standard of expectations for the behavior of police officers in police custody, recognizing once again that the individuals in police custody are particularly vulnerable. So the police officers must demonstrate a very high level of professional self-control. indeed, it was argued in the case that the slaps were provoked by the applicants themselves, who didn't behave, so to say, nicely to the police officers, which, well, was very much true, but nevertheless, the conclusion of the court didn't change in that respect. The Bouygues versus Belgium case essentially removed the requirement for attaining the threshold of severity for ill treatment of persons who are placed in police custody. And the way it is formulated in the judgment of the Grand Chamber is very broad. In fact, the subsequent case law has clarified a little bit the scope of that presumption, and in my personal view, more has to be done to further clarify it. However, the principle is very strong and extremely important, I would say foundational, for the requirements of the proper policing, proper conduct of investigations. So looking at all these judgments together, it's with Tomazi, Ribic, Selmuni, Gevgen, and finally Bouygues, we can observe a clear evolution. The court has progressively reinforced three central ideas: the vulnerability of persons in police custody, the professional responsibility of police officers, and the absolute prohibition of coercion during questioning. These principles strongly support a policing model in which information gathering replaces confession-driven interrogation. And this brings us back to the standards developed by the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture. Based on decades of monitoring visits across Europe, the CPT has consistently identified police questioning as one of the situations where the risk of ill treatment is greatest. The committee therefore encouraged states to adopt modern investigative interviewing methods supported by specialized training, audio and video recording of interviews, and clear safeguards during police custody. These measures are designed to prevent ill treatment before it occurs, rather than merely responding to violations after the fact. And I should probably add that the choice of this model of interviewing also greatly helps the state to fulfill its procedural obligations under Article 3 of the Convention. Because once everything is recorded, all the audio and video recordings are there, when the procedures are clear, when the access of the lawyer, access of a doctor, and the information of the third parties about the fact of the person's detention have been also implemented, then it is not difficult for the state to respond to any allegation of ill treatment according to the standard required by the procedural obligations under Article 3 as developed by the European Court of Human Rights. So this aspect is not directly related, I would say, to the actual questioning, to the actual conduct of the interview, but then from the policy standpoint, I think that's also a crucial argument for the state to implement the investigative interviewing model. To conclude, I should say that the evolution of the court's case law shows an increasingly strict approach to the protection of individuals in police custody. The message is clear: coercion has no place in modern policing under Article 3 of the Convention. In this context, the transition toward investigative interviewing, which is strongly supported by the CPT and increasingly adopted across Europe, represents not only a methodological improvement in policing, but also an important step towards ensuring that police practice fully respects the fundamental values of the Convention system. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Judge Mykola Gnatovskyy. And I think I speak for everyone. We have had two extremely interesting presentations now, and I really think I would be in a miss if I didn't open up for at least one or two questions. But I just wanted also to inform you that we will have a coffee break, and during the coffee break, there will also be some possibility to have some demonstration of a new artificial intelligence enabled crime scene investigation tool. It will be just outside. And then after the coffee break at 11:10, so I hope all of you will remain, because after the coffee break, we will have a panel discussion with 3 really excellent participants from Ukraine. They will all participate online, and it will also be moderated. We are really lucky to have Eva Pastrana here. She will moderate this discussion. So I can promise you that that will also be a very, very interesting part. But before opening up for the coffee break, is there any questions to either Asbjørn or Mykola? Yes, please.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Hugh Chetwynd. I'm from the CPT. I wanted to come back on the issue of interviewing persons in extreme situations, and whether or not, as you're aware of Professor Allison and all the studies that they have done about the importance of matching particular types of, or matching characters of investigators and interviewers with types of persons who are being to be interviewed. And I raise that because obviously there's or is it the question that if everyone is properly trained on how to do investigative interviewing, it doesn't matter who is opposite you, because those skills will allow you? Or would you say that that is already a question of manipulation?
Well, thank you very much, Chief, my boss. If you look at the studies of Allison, Professor Allison, and their colleagues from the University of Liverpool, granted a lot of money from actually Barack Obama in the Higg research, because Barack Obama, when he came to presidency in the United States, he wanted to end torture. So he granted a lot of money for research to come up with methodology that is more effective than torture and bad than torture. And they got the grant, and they studied 2,000 hours of British police interviews of suspects of terror. And they found that those detectives that were able to follow not only, should we say, the methodology, but also the ethos underpinning it, those were the detectives who actually got most information. When it comes to personality traits, I think, as far as I read Allison best, is that we all have different kinds of personalities. It's a matter of, should we say, be adaptive during the interviews. So they are not saying that you are born to be an interviewer or you are not born. We all have different, should we say, communicative skills. And that we need to be adaptive. But first and foremost, what they say is that we need to uphold the principles, the HARE principles, they call them. And these are the same principles that underpins investigative interviewing, and it has always done. But they go deeper. For instance, honesty. That if you are not honest, you will not receive any information. So I don't think that that's manipulative at all. And they also say that the core principle is to respect the person's autonomy. No matter what he or she may be suspected of, you must respect their human dignity and autonomy in order to establish communication. And if you want information, you have to establish communication. So I don't find their methodology deceptive or manipulative, because it is based on these values: honesty, autonomy, etc. And if you don't have that, then they will not embrace whatever techniques you come up with. So that needs to be the foundation. So I'm a great, should we say, admirer and a friend of Lawrence and his wife and the team in Liverpool. And recently wrote a chapter in the new book in which I say that now it's time to really merge investigative interviewing and the whole forensic psychology community with human rights, because there's been two different fields, kind of, and the CPT has been a bridge a carrier between the fields, but now it's really time to merge. So yeah, their book is coming out soon, and yeah, that's the best I can answer you, and we'll discuss further. But I don't find their orbit technique manipulative, because if you don't have the foundation of respect and autonomy and honesty, etc., then it's not advocated by them. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Julieta Bisiuli, and I represent the European Implementation Network, a Strasbourg-based NGO focusing on the effective implementation of the court's judgments. And through that lens, we follow thematically also the issue of ill treatment and the general measures many jurisdictions have to take to resolve those issues. I admit I only knew elements about this methodology, so I was very glad to hear more about this from you, because indeed it is something we can use in the requests towards the member states about how to do things better in order to adopt the necessary general measures. I would have one question which is very often addressed to us as civil society when we present our work. This very interesting methodology, have you also developed impact assessment indicators? It would be very interesting for me to know, how do you measure impact then in terms of faster resolution of the investigations, or in terms of perhaps convictions that do not get then challenged at second instance, at third instance? So that is very interesting for me to hear, and I guess it might concern others as well who are searching for ways to maximize the demonstration of impact these very promising techniques can demonstrate. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, please, Asbjørn.
Thank you very much for your excellent question. And it is very hard to do research based on this, because prior to investigative interviewing, there was no research. We have no, should we say, ground. But what we see in the United Kingdom, who was the first country in the world that adopted this regime, and including mandatory electronic recording, the amount of, should we say, judicial scandals they had has decreased definitely. But when it comes to, should we say, a documented impact, at least from a research perspective, I must refer to the rather recent developed, the Mendes principles, who has now been adopted by the General Assembly in New York, in which we have the principle number 2, the foundation of the principles, or investigative interviewing as we call them. You will see all the research documenting the fact that it reduces error and increases the amount of actionable and reliable information. So if you read Principle 2 in the Mendes Principles, you will see a tense, should we say, presentation of the available evidence that it is more effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asbjørn. And with that, again, big thanks to Asbjørn and to Judge Mykola. And I'm now happy to give you the possibility to have some coffee, something to bite in, and also then something that could be very stimulating for your brains, namely the presentation of artificial intelligence crime scene investigation methodology. So please come back at 11:10. Thank you. So thank you to everyone for coming back to the second part and an even more interesting part of the seminar. Without further ado, I will give the floor to our excellent moderator, Eva Pastrana, who is, as you know, head of Criminal Law Division in Directorate of Security, Integrity and Rule of Law in the Council of Europe. So please, Eva, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and then welcome to our speakers online. I just want to use this opportunity to say that I'm also the Secretary to the Council of Europe Committee on Crime Problems, and this is the main intergovernmental committee under which more than 40 criminal law conventions have been developed over the years. And this committee was set up before I was born, so it's a very old one, as you can imagine, but something that some conventions I wanted to highlight that are relevant for today and also for Ukraine are of course, the Convention on Mutual Legal Assistance in international, in criminal matters. Then we recently developed and was adopted by the Committee of Ministers, the Convention on the Protection of the Environment through Criminal Law. And it is applicable also in times of war. And then we have our forthcoming Assets Recovery Protocol to the Convention on Anti-Money Laundering and the countering of finances of terrorists. So it's all very, very relevant conventions for all the countries and even worldwide, because there are countries beyond the Council of Europe that are ratifying. Furthermore, there is a committee of experts working under this intergovernmental committee that is looking and analyzing the interplay between the Council of Europe conventions on mutual legal assistance, extradition, transfer of sentenced persons, and the Hague Ljubljana conventions dealing on with core international crimes. Because obviously the Council of Europe conventions were developed for crimes, thinking in the beginning ordinary crimes, but core international crimes, we're talking about genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, they're also crimes. Okay, so it's just for you to know. If later anyone is interested, I'm ready to hear. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Is Denys Lysenko. He's the deputy head of the War Crime Department in the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. He has more than 15 years working there, and since 2020, he's coordinating investigations and prosecutions of international crimes committed in the context of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, focusing on ensuring accountability for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other serious violations of international law. His work is focusing on strengthening investigative practices. We heard this morning, implementing trauma-informed interviewing standards, supporting victims and witnesses, and safeguarding the integrity of criminal proceedings. So, Denys, thanks for joining us online, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for this opportunity. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Council of Europe for organizing this seminar and for opportunity to share Ukraine's experience in implementing into practice the principle of investigative interviewing for investigations and information gathering, so-named Mendes principle, particularly in the part concerning the use of investigative interviewing during the investigation of international crimes. In addition, I take this opportunity to thank the Council of Europe as well as governments of states, including Norway, that support Ukraine in this difficult time of Russian unprecedented attack to our sovereignty. A war that claims Ukraine lives every day and harms the civilian population with a scale unseen since the Second World War. I represent the Office of Prosecutor General of Ukraine and work in the area of counteracting crimes committed during the armed conflict. What I want to share today is not a theory or a model in some ideal conditions. It is an experience of daily practice during war, when every procedural decision has consequences, both for an individual and for the future accountability for the atrocity crimes. Why for us a paradigm shift is not a matter of necessity, but not a choice. We operate in conditions where the scale and complexity of international crimes are unprecedented. In Ukraine, more than 230,000 war crimes have been already registered. We deal with a huge number of victims and witnesses, actually millions, including children, the elderly, people who have suffered sexual violence, torture, captivity, loss of property, the relatives, or occupation. Also, we deal with direct perpetrators of war crimes, thousands of Russian prisoners of war, etc. Working with such individuals and obtaining their testimonies since the beginning of full-scale invasion has posed a serious new challenge for investigators and prosecutors, as the national system had no prior experience of this kind. At the same time, there has been and remains a need to obtain admissible evidences, fruitful and relevant information that we can verify and confirm, and mostly important, to preserve human dignity throughout the process. Under these conditions, the concept of investigative interviewing, which relatively recently emerged in the Ukrainian legal culture, has provided us with the approaches we needed and has proven effective. For us, investigative interviewing is not a fashionable concept or some external requirement. It is a functional response to our real challenges of war and to ensuring future accountability. So, what has already been done in practical implementation? The most important step taken by the Office of Prosecutor General, together with partners, was launching training for prosecutors and spreading the concept of investigative interviewing among practitioners. We initiated a series of training courses on investigative interviews for investigators and prosecutors, including the model on the Mendes principles. Prohibition of coercion and torture, prioritizing information, our confession, respect for dignity, the effect of leading questions, ethical standards, etc. Over 150 prosecutors from all levels have already participated in the investigative interview basic development program. Specialized programs have also been held for certain categories, such like minors or sexual violence victims. Modern methods of interviewing, including the Mendes principles and investigative interviews, are now one of the core competencies for prosecutors contracting international crimes, according to our competency metrics. It means that every prosecutor and specialized in investigation of war crimes have to be involved in the trainings for this topic. We are building an internal pool of trainers, experienced practitioners who have undergone advanced training and can support colleagues locally. Supervision and mentoring have begun. Analyzing interviews with focus on methodology, structured feedback, and reviewing of typical mistakes. Second important step was methodological materials and field tools are being developed. On April last year, the Office of Prosecutor General presented a handbook and the Ukrainian version of UN ODC, a learning platform on investigative interviewing, developed jointly with the Norwegian Centre of Human Rights and available free of charge for practitioners. Standardizing protocols for preparing and conducting interviews are being created. Planning risk checklists, matrices of open questions, etc. Reminder cards for interviewers are introduced. How to establish contact, explain procedure, build free recall, and clarify it without leading. Next step was interagency coordination, and it was being established. Common standards are being agreed with investigative units so that procedural supervisors and investigators work within the same methodological framework. Channels of cooperation are being built with psychologists, interpreters, forensic experts, with a clear understanding of roles, responsibilities, and confidentiality, of course. Specialists from the newly created Coordination Center for Victims and Witness Support of the Prosecutor General's Office are actively involved in organizing interviews. Next important step was providing of technical conditions for conducting investigative interviews during our criminal proceedings. In 2025, this international support and based on the best Norwegian practices, special premises for interviews were designed and equipped at the Prosecutor General's Office. Soon, similar rooms will be set up in regional prosecutors' offices, specializing in international crimes. Each unit will be provided with relevant mobile equipment. Also, we have some plans for nearest future. One component of investigative interviewing is evaluation of interviewing results. Traditionally, investigators and prosecutors have lacked a culture of evaluating investigation acts for self-improvement. Therefore, it is crucial to foster professional habits that encourage evaluation of interviews. The Prosecutor General has approved Prosecutor's Office development strategy for next 3 years. Includes as a task improving the quality of testimonies obtained and introducing a system of evaluation. We expect that introduction of the system for assessing the quality of interviews. The same document provides for mechanism to avoid secondary victimization, stigmatization, and traumatization, and to implement the trauma-informed approach. This will require advanced training and improved practices for interviewing witnesses and victims in vulnerable conditions. Measures to improve investigative interviewing are also included in the draft of new strategy of Prosecutor General's Office on prosecution of international crimes and its implementation plan. Among the tasks mentioned in the strategy are the next: drafting legislative proposals for strengthen guarantees of support for victims, applicants, and witnesses of international crimes, especially vulnerable groups. Implementing individual assessments of vulnerability and risk of re-victimization, intimidation, or retaliation, and identifying the needs for protective measures. Another task is creating and introducing a specialized protocol or standard for interviewing based on Mendes principle and best international practice. The next is applying investigative interview methods, including the PACE method, PACE model, or its adaptations for witnesses, victims, and suspects in international crimes cases. Establishing a monitoring and evaluation system for interviews in international crimes proceedings, including criteria for prosecutors to assess investigative quality, obtained testimony, and admissibility. Separate tracks of investigative interview we have for some vulnerable categories. Speaking about the current results of Ukraine's relatively limited experience in using investigative interviewing, it can be started that the most tangible outcomes are in work with children, adapted spaces, specially trained interviewers, involvement of psychologists, minimization of repeated interviews. Victims of sexual violence, gender-sensitive protocols, confidentiality rules, prioritization of safety and autonomy, and persons who survived or suffered torture and captivity, interrogation with medical and psychosocial support, close cooperation with experts under the Istanbul Protocol. For example, how juvenile prosecutors currently work with children. Interviews are conducted in specially equipped premises, so-called green rooms, and Child Protection Center, according to Barnahus model. Psychologist is involved in an interview process to help establish communication, sometimes adapting vocabulary to the child's age, developmental features, and psychological state. The psychologist helps to adapt the process to the child's needs, even when the investigator or prosecutors has no undergone specialized training. Psychologists support them. The child's legal representative is chosen as someone the child trusts and feels comfortable testifying in front of. Attention is paid to situations where a child may feel embarrassed to testify in front of parents. In such cases, the legal representative can be replaced to ensure the child can provide testimony freely. The process of obtaining testimony from child is not only one side to gather evidences. This organization of interviewing also provides psychological support and opportunities for therapy. Referrals are made when possible. Video recording of the interviews allows in certain cases the use of the recording for experts examination without involving child again. And the recorded testimony can be used as an evidence in court. This directly reduces the risk of traumatization, the changes of the testimony due to influence from perpetrators or other interested parties, and ensures the best interest of child in criminal proceedings. The judicial practice has already been formed where judges not only consider testimony given by child during pretrial investigation, according to special procedure, interrogation during pretrial investigation in court, but also when such testimony is recorded on video. And this can be used during the court hearings. So current results in this area of our work. 41% of children are interviewed in specially equipped premises, green rooms and child protection centers. And 85% are interviewed with the participation of psychologists. As for investigation outcomes, the number of cases referred to court and convictions for sexual violence against children has increased, even in the cases where the violence occurred in the past. There were no witnesses and the violence left no physical traces. What is the advantage of investigative interview with children? We obtain reliable testimony from child while the child does not suffer negative psychological consequences. A balance between the interests of child and justice. Of course, the national justice system faces certain challenges in ensuring full and effective use of the best approaches to investigative interview. The need to ensure unified standards and common language. Investigators, prosecutors, and operational units must work within the same methodological framework. Without this, interviews become a matter of personal style. Evidence's quality becomes uneven and courts remain skeptical. The need to embed human-centered and trauma-informed approaches in law enforcement work. We do not work with abstract sources of information. We work with people who have suffered extremely traumatic events. Therefore, investigative interviewing for us means minimizing re-traumatization, considering vulnerabilities, translation needs, cultural and gender aspects, absolute prohibition of coercion, ensuring voluntariness and informed choice. Next challenge is need to build a holistic procedural ecosystem. Interviews do not exist in vacuum. Necessary elements include video recording, chain of custody, clear rules for disclosure of materials, understandable criteria for quality assessment, etc. Perhaps one of the most important challenges is a regulatory framework for using investigative interviewing. Without it, the paradigm doesn't change, I believe. Therefore, our priorities are ensuring the Mendes principle in legislative and some departmental acts. Video recording as a default standard. Clear guarantees for vulnerable persons. Balance between openness and security. The possibility of using information obtained during pretrial investigation in court proceedings. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that for the Office of Prosecutor General, investigative interviewer is more than a method or technique. It is a value-based choice and a strategic investment in justice. We improve the quality of evidences, protect human rights, and strengthen the capacity of justice in the gravest cases. And as rightly noted, today, a fair trial doesn't not begin in court. It begins in the interviewing room. So this is our approach for now, and we are going to follow it nearest future for sure. Thank you for your attention, and of course, I'm open for discussion, questions, and partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denys, for this comprehensive presentation. And I will now go to Yuriy Belousov. He's the Deputy Director of the Economic Security Bureau of Ukraine, but he's probably the person who started it all a few years ago, who believed in this technique, and who started promoting investigative interviewing in Ukraine. He has more than 20 years of experience in law enforcement and human rights protection, and he has led several national efforts to combat torture, human rights violations, and other serious violations of international law. So, Yuriy, it's your turn now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure to see you, even in online format. I really believe that our next chance to meet would be in offline format. I'm very glad to see famous faces, colleagues we are working already for many years, and it's really a great pleasure that the Council of Europe, which is long-standing partner of Ukraine, is organizing such important event. Special thanks to our Norwegian family, to our British colleagues as well, who are helping Ukraine to promote, to be better, let's say, in many aspects, including law enforcement initiatives. Just a couple of words from my personal background, because I first met with the investigative interviewing concept in 2016 during an international meeting, which was chaired by the Juan Mendes. Sure, at that time when I first see this famous guy, Asbjørn Rachlew, who is impressed me with his patience and with his energy, explaining how investigative interviewing working in practice. And a lot of other guys who are promoting the investigative interviewing concept in the globe. And but for me, it was a huge discovery that such instrument exists as investigative interviewing. At that time, I had a pretty big experience working in the sphere of human rights and law enforcement, worked as the deputy head of Human Rights Monitoring Department in National Police, then worked as the head of NPM, and had a pretty big background in the sphere of human rights. And our work traditionally, as a human rights activist, was like when we were talking to law enforcement, it was like a prohibition language, when we always said during training sessions or during the meetings what law enforcement officers shouldn't do, which conventions they violate, and what consequences to the country it leads to. And during these sessions, pretty often law enforcement officers were asking, okay, guys, what we should do, how we should do our job to follow human rights standards from the one side, and then to protect you and the society from a crime. And at that time, I didn't know what to answer. We always said, come on, guys, it's your job to find the proper way. Our job is to tell you what you shouldn't do. And such approach led to the situation when the human rights society was on the one side of the barricade, law enforcement on the other side, hating each other and meeting regularly, but there was no actually joint understanding on the way which could combine these two approaches. And during that meeting, I mentioned, so for me, I understood that there is a way forward. There is a concept which could combine these two dilemmas, let's say. From the one side, how to effectively do law enforcement job, and from another side, how not to violate human rights standards. And investigative interview is exactly the tool which combines these two approaches. Together with our partners, international partners, national partners, in particular with Vasilina and our national team of experts, so for these 2 years, we tried to introduce different approaches related to the introduction of investigative interviewing in our daily job. And Vasilina, in her presentation, I'm sure she would give more details on this way. But I think that the main results we achieved for these 10 years is that investigative interviewing is no longer perceived as a foreign or abstract practices which is not relevant to Ukraine. And that's the biggest maybe results I feel we have at the moment, because all law enforcement officers and the leaders of law enforcement institutions and prosecutor office, they already know what the investigative interviewing is, and that it's a national practice which is effective. And again, Vasilina would give more details on that. But important issue that when open evasion started in 2022, it significantly stipulated the development of investigative interviewing practice in Ukraine. Because at that time I was leading the Department of War Crime Investigations, and exactly with Denys and other colleagues, we faced this situation in 2022. And the issue is that at that time, because of the war, there appeared new investigative challenges, which didn't exist before. It's a massive, massive number of victims and witnesses. It's situations when millions of witnesses will live in the country. A lot of significant part of them were injured or killed or could be killed in any minute, and you never know. So because you never know where this rocket or drone or could hit, and we came to the situation when another issue also that the suspects who were in our investigations, who were mostly Russian militaries, they were exchanged during the investigation for our prisoners of war. And in these circumstances, we appeared in a situation when we pretty often have a chance to conduct just one interview, because for the second, you don't have time or chance or something could go differently. That's what the whole focus should be on this first interview. Plus, significantly, another opportunity which significantly also stipulated the development of investigative interviewing, that exactly in this time there were some changes to the criminal procedure code incorporated, where the judge was given a chance to use pre-trial statement as a potential evidence. it was significant shift, because before that it was total ban for use of any pretrial statement. And actually it was, done as an idea was to prevent torture in this way. If pretrial statements can't be used in the court, the hypothesis is that the investigator will not use torture to get confessions, because you can't use these materials in the court. But unfortunately, it had a significant side effect, where investigators who don't torture people, who used to interview people, and who use interview as a main source of getting information, they were significantly demotivated, because there is no need for you to prepare and to conduct several hours interview if no one could see it except of you, because you have no chance for the judge even to touch it. Since 2022, this opportunity was given to the judge, but there were some restrictions. So if you interview witness and victim, it could be used by the judge as an evidence, just in case if it's video typed. And it means it's for investigator and prosecutor, it means that it should be of a good quality, and the judge should have no doubt that if confession would be, or any other information being given by suspect, for example, that it's a voluntary. There is no pressure. And that's why for investigators, they had to understand, okay, that means that we should have a good interview prepared. We need to prepare ourselves, because it would be videotaped, and then the judge could see it. That's significantly changed the perception of the interview by investigators. When, in terms of interview of the suspect, there was an additional demand that it's not just should be videotaped, but the lawyer should be present there. And it's totally significantly changed the perception of the investigator, because you shouldn't just make a good video. You should prepare your interview in a way that, in the presence of lawyer, if you get the information, it should be, everything should be organized in a proper way. And all this situation, but the bad situation of war and legislation changes, ensure the support of our friends, international partners, significantly stipulated the promotion of investigative interview. At the moment, I worked in a different position. I worked as deputy head of the Bureau of Economical Security, which is our mission is to fight with the shadow economy and with the enemies, let's say, who are not so obvious. And our task is to help to reconstruct Ukraine, to protect foreign investment, and to make economy of Ukraine stronger during the war. And what I realized with my experience of working in the sphere of investigative interviewing as a tool for prevention torture, as a tool for investigating war crimes, that this tool could be fully used in investigating different economic crimes, because the principles, and the format absolutely the same. And the good benefit for me at the moment and for our team is that Ukraine already has its own national experience, which is fit national standards, which fit already institutional practices, and that's definitely gives us an opportunity also to move our institution in this sphere. And I really believe that with the support of our international partners, which I already mentioned, Norwegian guys, British guys, colleagues from other countries, and definitely Council of Europe, with this institution, we have a long-standing history of cooperation in the sphere of human rights and law enforcement. But we really believe with this support, Ukraine would be able to become, or to make an investigative interview the main formal standard of conducting interviews in Ukraine, which would make our law enforcement system strong in these difficult circumstances. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. With this, let me stop my intervention, and I would be happy to answer your questions when there would be time for this.
Thank you very much, Yuriy. And now we go to Vasilina Jaworska, who is the CEO of JustGroup. This is the Ukrainian NGO that is advancing a fair, efficient human-centered criminal justice system in Ukraine, and has been also, I understand, has been also working closely with Yuriy for some years, and is one of the main partners. And it's really, I really appreciate seeing government officials and members, representatives from NGOs working together, having personally also an NGO background at the beginning 30 years ago. So Vasilina, you have been leading a lot of Ukrainian initiatives, and I would like to mention two. First, the country's first university course on investigative interviewing. Okay, and I think this is great because you should also learn from university to embed these the techniques, but also embed the ethos, as you mentioned, Asbjørn. And second, to the coordination of this community of experts dedicated to developing interviewing techniques in Ukraine. So, Vasilina, it's your turn now. Thank you.
Dear Excellencies and colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank you, the Council of Europe, for organizing this seminar and for the opportunity to share the Ukrainian experience of integrating investigative interviewing into practical work, as well to reflect together on how to make this standard truly operational and scalable, so that it becomes a core standard for the whole criminal justice system. I would also like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the Council of Europe and to the partner states, in particular Norway, for supporting Ukraine in this difficult for us time as our country faces the unprovoked aggression of Russian Federation. A few words about my background. Eva also already mentioned some of the part of this. I'm a lawyer by degree. My professional experience has been closely connected with the field of human rights, justice, and criminal justice reform in my country. For almost 15 years, I worked for National Foundation of Open Society Foundation in Ukraine as a human rights and justice manager. Over the years, I observed and took part in different reforms in justice sectors, including free legal aid reform, creating a national preventive mechanism, and introduction of procedural safeguards and custody records within the police system in Ukraine. Now I am leading Ukrainian NGO JustGroup, and where our mission is to contribute to the transformation of the criminal justice system into a fair, effective, and human-centered. Since 2017, I have been coordinating the work of National Expert Team on Investigative Interviewing. Now, with our team of JustGroup, we are focusing on comprehensive implementation of investigative interviewing in Ukraine, together with our institution, national institution, and including professional training programs for practitioners, research in the field, developing community of champions, working with universities on integrating the standard into curriculums. And let me express my gratitude to the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights for your partnership, expertise, guidance, and support on this long journey for us. When we first start talking about investigative interviewing in Ukraine in 2016-17, it sounded rather abstract. For many practitioners, it was like another, let's say, international standards, another innovation that existed somewhere in manuals or presentation, but not in real daily practice. We were happy enough to have Mr. Asbjørn together with us in Kyiv at the very beginning to have a very honest conversation with our leadership in criminal justice institution to explain the core idea and practical side as well. If we look closely at the history of criminal justice reform in Ukraine, one pattern becomes apparent. We have indeed learned how to change the legislative framework to integrate international standards, adapt norms, and adapt new codes or legislation. But very often, these changes have risks to be formally implemented, but do not have enough time to take root into practice. That is why many were convinced that investigative interviewing and its implementation could have the same risks. Today, the situation is fundamentally different from my perspective. And the key message I want to convey that now we have managed to achieve a systemic shift from a state where almost no one knew about the standard to a state where the investigative interviewing is a recognized professional approach and where institutional leaders recognize the need to implement it at the policy and practice levels. At most of our meetings and discussion inside our country are on how, not what or why now. At the same time, this shift did not happen automatically, and it is certainly not complete yet. The implementation of investigative interviewing is a complex, multi-level process that requires systemic work with legislative framework, education, management, and infrastructure. The first step in implementing investigative interviewing in our case was realizing of a very simple but very fundamental from my perspective thing. It is impossible to change practice only through mass training. We have seen this in other examples of transformation. A standard can be described in detail, presented, and even well received. But if it does not have internal champions in the system, people who really have accepted its logic and core idea and are ready to live with this in their daily work, it remains an external construct, not inside standard, and exists formally, but it does not work. That is why we were very focused on setting and developing a community of champions of investigative interviewing in our institution. That is why we deliberately focus on quality and depth rather than quantity. We were happy to identify entry point institution in our case. It was National Anti-Corruption Bureau in 2019 as newly set up law enforcement agency. When we started working with National Anti-Corruption Bureau detectives in 2019, we have no illusion that everyone would immediately integrate the approach into their practice. Out of a large group, 10 or 12 people remained to begin really test the approach, conducting interviews differently, making mistakes, analyzing, revising, and discussing among themselves. It was a small group, but then it became like a core national team of trainers and experts. These people now are working on practical level, but also at the strategic level as well. They are ready to think strategically, what is essential in the approach, what are the risks, how to integrate it into Ukrainian legislative context, how to not to lose meaning while simplifying the form. This team includes now experts and practitioners from various institutions of criminal justice system, Office of Prosecutor General, regional, district prosecutor offices, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and National Police as well. And we are more than happy to have here Mr. Yuriy Belousov, who was among the first champions of investigative interviewing in Ukraine, and Mr. Denys Lysenko, who is very supportive to that approach within war crimes infrastructure. At some point, we clearly formulated for ourselves that investigative interviewing is not algorithm. It's a change of the logic of investigation, a change in the investigative mindset. And actually, it changed through testing, lived experience, internal doubts, and conviction that approach works. That is why a second level of work appeared, support of newcomers, regular meetings, reflective groups, analysis of complex cases, mentoring, and many other formats we are practicing now. And we did not stop at conducting development programs and events on investigative interviews. In fact, we took the role of implementing agency, an organization that not only initiate the change, but also accompanies it over time together with institution and community of champions. Because actually it is in this long tail of implementation that real transformation takes place. And as a result of our long work during the 3 or even 4 years, the national standard for investigative interviewing were born, and it was presented and launched together with Office of Prosecutor General in 2023. When we deeply implement in investigative interviewing, it is always important to talk about them not as a technique, but as a way of thinking. At a certain stage, we clearly saw the risk of simplification. Any standard can be reduced to a structure. For example, preparation, establishing contact, free recall, obtaining information. Formally, this corresponds to the algorithm described in the standard. But we realized that if the accusatory logic remains at the core, if the internal point of success does not change, then no change will occur. We conducted a study that demonstrated something very telling. 61% of investigators in Ukraine in 2020 consider obtaining a confession to be a successful interrogation. And this is not just a number, it is an indicator of culture sometimes. If success is a confession, then all behaviors can be focused toward achieving it. And it's not about investigative interviewing and this shift of culture. That is why our top priority in our country, and I believe that it's crucial for implementing or rolling out investigative interviewing in very different jurisdictions, is talking about investigative mindset as a core for investigative interviewing. In our development programs, we are conducting in Ukraine investigative interviewing basic, and which we launched since 2022, we focus on the logic of investigation and mindset first. And again, we are more than happy to have our Norwegian and British colleagues, which set up this priority for us. And that was the main focus of developing champions inside the system. Now we have very special focus on working with Ukrainian law schools, because we believe that when we talk about investigative mindset or even mindset state of lawyer, investigator or prosecutor, is all about our law schools and what standards are setting there. The introduction of investigative interviews in Ukraine took on particular significance in 2022. Full-scale war radically changed the context in which the criminal justice system operates. We have thousands of witnesses and victims. Their testimony may be lost both physically and mentally, when over time they are simply unable to recall the details of the event due to trauma, relocation, or even loss of contact. In recent years, given the strict concept of inadmissibility of testimony in our courts, working with interview has been devalued by practitioners to a certain extent and is no longer perceived as a strategic stage of investigation. If it won't be used in court anyway, the motivation to invest time, attention, and quality decreases. But today, we are in a very different reality, and we need to ask ourselves honestly, how can we ensure both procedural safeguards for parties and the effectiveness of justice in wartime? In this sense, investigative interviews become a tool of preserving evidence. If the interview is conducted properly with the explanation of rights, ensuring the right to defense with high quality video recording and in compliance with documentation standards, it can be used in court. This affects not only the admissibility of evidence, but also the duration and quality of the trial. Amendments to our national CPC have opened up this additional opportunity for use of testimony, which Yuriy and Denys already mentioned. This is a unique experience for the country going through war. But that is precisely why we need to be especially careful. The balance between the right to defense, proper recording, voluntary testimony, and the need to preserve evidence is extremely delicate. And here, investigative interviewing can be the point of balance. Therefore, today, the implementation of investigative interviewing is a matter of strategic planning in wartime. It is a matter of how the state ensures the preservation of evidence of war crimes, but not only. It is a matter of how we minimize the risks of losing information that may be important years from now. And that is why we are talking about the need of comprehensive plan for implementation of investigative interviewing in Ukraine. We see the implementation of investigative interviewing as a comprehensive system consisting of the following elements: consolidating the approach in the institutional internal policies. Second, defining a competency model for interviewers. Third, regular systemic training and professional development programs. The next, supervision and professional support within the practicing. The next, monitoring and evaluation the quality of interviews, developing infrastructure solution, including technical video recording. And the last, probably but not the least, alignment with the legislative framework. In other words, we're talking about creating an ecosystem in which investigative interviewing can function consistently rather than on case-by-case basis. We have already begun to see the managers are coming to understand that investigative interviewing are a tool for improving quality of the evidence base, minimizing procedural risks, and reducing the likelihood of miscarriage of justice. This means that it needs to be integrated through institutional policies. Another important component is monitoring and feedback. The institution needs to be able to analyze the quality of interviews, support the development of competencies, and identify system errors. Without this, there can be no sustainability. And this is where we see the main systemic shift for the next period. Investigative interviews are beginning to be viewed not as a project, initiative, or training, but as an element of shifting organizational policy and culture within the criminal justice system. Here I will stop, and thank you for your attention, and we'll be ready to listen to your question, comments, or reflection.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vasilina. Actually, we gave the three speakers a bit beyond the initially allocated time, but I think it's only fair considering they cannot join us in the networking spaces that this seminar has created. So I would like to give the audience the opportunity to raise questions. And if not, I will also ask my panelists or have myself some of them, but anyone would like to? Yes. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katarina, and I coordinate the collaboration with JustGroup, working at Norwegian Centre for Human Rights. Let me, before I come with my question, I just want to stress how impressive it is, the work Ukraine is doing. I mean, there are other countries in Europe not implementing this, and Ukraine is, no? Yeah. Ukraine is implementing investigative interviewing despite being in incredible challenging times and under full-scale invasion. So I just want to thank you for letting me take a small part in your journey. And then my question is, what additional forms of support from member states are needed to move from implementation and training you are doing now and to full institutionalization? Yeah.
If I may, I can start to answer this question. Actually, from the perspective of Prosecutor General's Office, I would like to mention that, as I said previously, we now in the process of adopting a new strategy of prosecution for international crimes, and a lot of measures regarding the implementation of investigative interview are mentioned in this strategy and implementation plan for this. That's why we are going to involve all possible international and foreign partners to realize all measures mentioned in this strategy. And of course, there is a lot of tasks in the area of implementation of investigative interview, such as creation of system of evaluation of interview, to creation of criteria of evaluation, improving of technical capacity for conducting this interview. So we had a lot of work, we have a lot of tasks, and we believe that we will reach out to you to support us and to join us during this process, and not only in Norwegian Centre for Human Rights, but also we expect that our partners from ACA group will support us, and of course we expect that we will do every task together, because we would like to satisfy and to follow all needed and the best international practices in this area. And of course, your knowledge, your expertise, and your advice would be very appreciated by us.
And just add to what Denys said. So which is important for us, and taking into account a pretty long period of cooperation with the Council of Europe and knowing your focus as well. It's important to know that we started to build, to develop institutions, specific institutions from inside, because there are some significant changes that institutions are ready, which is different from what we had several years ago. Top management of Bureau I'm representing at the moment as well, so are ready to be a platform for these developments. And here it's several issues which is worth mentioning. First, it's definitely I would suggest to work with the support of national team of experts on investigative interviewing, because Vasilina and her organization in particular, they're working on strengthening the number of people, increasing of number of national trainers who passed basic training and who is practicing investigative interviewing in Ukrainian institutions. It's a very interesting approach, because it's a mix of experts from different institutions: police, security service, war crime team, another National Anti-Corruption Bureau. And there would be a need to increase this number. It means that it's an issue of support of local trainings, basic trainings. There are some different already levels of trainers, with the involvement of international experts as well. But it's also important to strengthen the network of national trainers who are acting law enforcement officers, and creation conditions for conducting investigative interviewing in institutions. For example, in the war crime team, with the help of our Norwegian colleagues, we built several investigative interviewing rooms. It's a good space where during your work you could train at the same time by conducting these interviews. And it's a training format on the one side, but from another, so you work. It's a part of your work, and you use these interviews already in your criminal cases. That's why building such platforms where there would be inside of the institutions fully equipped investigative rooms, plus space for in-service training, plus the help with the methodology, plus the help of strengthening of capacity of national network, and cooperation with other countries and partners it's unfortunately we are not able to attend your meeting, but what you even mentioned, then during the coffee break, there was a presentation of AI model. I'm sitting here, Jesus, why I'm not there just to go and see, because we also are big fans of AI and we try to introduce it in different spheres or in different stages of interview or investigations. And for us, these new technologies also, very important issue. And this networking with other countries, with other practitioners, is also what we significantly need. And last point from my side, taking into account this shift of my professional career. So sure, for me, it would be really interesting if there is any experience of using investigative interviewing in conducting financial and investigations and economic investigations. It also would be interesting to see which experience is existing, how in this combination with human rights standards and deficiency. Thank you.
Okay, I'll let Asbjørn address this issue.
Thank you very much. And listening to you makes me very proud of the work that you have done. Unbelievably. And I can tell, because I have been fighting, the change in my own country. So I know that, but the reason why you will succeed, one of the reasons is that you acknowledge your vulnerabilities. You are open about, should we say, things that needs to be improved. Many states, they just, they don't talk about it, but you are open about. So this is why I'm so sure that you will. And while you are doing this in this hard time, of course, you are preparing also for the day when peace comes and you have defeated the aggressor. Then there are new challenges of building, Ukraine from, and you are already ahead of that. So when it comes to your question, Yuriy, let me explain to you that the person that is the head of the Norwegian oil fund, it is probably, I think, one of the largest economical funds in the world. It has nothing to do with the criminal justice system, but Nicolai Tangen, the chief executive of the Norwegian oil fund, he has stated that all his employees that gathers information on behalf of the Norwegian oil fund, they must have investigative interviewing training. Because if we call it interview or conversation or meetings, if the purpose is to gather as accurate and reliable information as possible, and he wants to make sure that we invest in the right, should we say, sectors and companies around the world, then if the purpose is to gather as much accurate and reliable information, we have the methodology, and you have understood that. So just keep going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there more questions from the audience? Yes, Ambassador?
Yeah, I wanted to ask this question because we are discussing, as you know, of course, a lot the issue of the special tribunal. And I was just wanting to ask you to what extent there is awareness, for instance, in the Special Prosecutor's Office about the fact, and I think this was mentioned by the JustGroup CEO as well, the fact that information that you are gathering now can be useful in a future process in the Special Tribunal. Is there awareness about that in Ukraine? Thank you.
Denys, maybe you start and I will.
Yes, I can start. Actually, as you know very well, Tribunal unfortunately was not launched for this moment, so there is no certain understanding how is going this tribunal, how this tribunal is going to use our evidences gathered during our daily activity. So that's why we presume that probably prosecutor, who is going to be appointed, we hope, he will ask us and we will provide relevant evidences to the Office of Prosecutor of Specialized Tribunal. But it could be probably it could be the decision when some evidences and testimonies of victims should be presented by themselves during some court hearings. It can be there. I don't know exactly how it is going to be, because it was not launched, unfortunately, for now. But anyway, we expect that our evidences and our interrogation, including the recording of testimony of witnesses, interrogation of witnesses and victims, will be available for tribunal. And all our materials that we provide to Office of Prosecutor will be considered during the preparation of materials to be transferred to the court and judges. That's why we do our best that our materials and our recordings of testimony are created according to all needed international standards and best practices that we have. It's our tasks, and we try to do this. But unfortunately, we don't know exactly how it is going to be considered in tribunal. But we'll see, and we are pretty sure that quality of our evidence is enough for the requirements of tribunal. I believe in this.
If I may to add, Mr. Ambassador, to your question, that since 2022, we are just like a example. Yeah, since 2022, we were in good touch with International Criminal Court, and these investigators who have office in Kiev, and some of them are well-known experts in actual investigative interviewing, who have been involved by JustGroup and our team in training of our prosecutors. And it's important because there is a already for this year, very clear mechanism on transfer of evidences from Ukrainian cases to International Criminal Court. And these first arrest warrants, 6 arrest warrants, which were announced by the International Criminal Court, significantly were based on Ukrainian evidence. A significant part of that. And if for International Criminal Court, if they see that any evidence collected by Ukrainian law enforcement officers fit their standards, they take it. And in our discussions with our investigators and prosecutors, we were using this argument. Because, it was pretty challenging, especially in the very beginning of open invasion, to explain to our investigators and prosecutors who were under the attacks all the time, losing their friends and relatives, that they should keep the standards of the highest standards possible. Because they come on, this argument, come on, they are enemies. It's obvious why we should collect and waste our time on collecting all the evidence in a proper manner. But we explained as an argument that, guys, in the end, our evidence would be in International Criminal Court. And we never know which case would be in the focus of International Criminal Court. And if they open our case and see that the quality is terrible, so that's what I, for example, at that time as the head of crime department, which was the worst I could even imagine, because they would judge the rest prosecutors and investigators and the whole Ukraine that we don't fit the standards of rule of law standards. And at the moment, so significant part of evidence is transferred to International Criminal Court. As to the special tribunal, it's also a unique approach of Ukraine that with the help from international partners, we established International Centre for Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression, which work already for 3 years. There is no tribunal yet, but Ukrainian prosecutors with other prosecutors sitting in Hague are collecting evidence, structuring evidence for the tribunal. It's something unbelievable. We structure the indictment for the court which doesn't exist. And it's already structured. It's not just we believe it would simplify the work of the future tribunal, because they would already got like an analytical document, let's call it like that, where all evidence would be structured in the proper way. That's why investigative interviews are definitely a part of this agenda. And it's a good argument, in promoting the quality of Ukrainian investigations, that it's not just for our national use, it's for the history, for international community. That's why the quality should be such a high standard. That's why I think that the special tribunal argument, let's call it like that, definitely could be used and maybe more widely used as well, in addition to arguments which we use for International Criminal Court. But again, we also say that, guys, not just international courts, actually, because one of the first indictment which we had was in the Finnish court. And in Finland, where we transferred our evidences, our Finnish colleagues use it to prosecute a war criminal in Finland. That's why using this in universal jurisdiction is also an important tool, because other countries could use our evidence. That's why we really paid significant attention. But again, special tribunal argument could be just additional argument why we should keep a quality of our evidences very high.
Excellent explanation by two of you. I don't know if the ambassador wants to. Oh, okay, look, I had a series of questions. Do not worry, because I will not go through them. I will turn one question into an assertion, and it is that obviously international partners should align their technical assistance and their support to the needs that we just heard. And then I will just raise one question: is how can NGOs contribute? Maybe I give the floor to Vasilina on this.
Thank you for your questions. It's really very good to, space for reflection on the NGO roles. Personally, given this our experience with investigative interviewing, advocacy, promoting, and everything, I believe that it's very important when in the country you have a non-state actor, let's say, who is capable to frame the strategic agenda of designing and implementing investigative interviewing promotion. Yes. So, because, for example, when we talk about Ukrainian context, we have very different law enforcement agencies. We have OPG offices. We have many experts here. And it's really sometimes we feel there is lack of, strategic framing of very different efforts. And when we talk about our experience, it's something we introduce for the system. We are ready to accompany the system, the institution, the practitioners in implementing these new standards. Not only, again, advocating, not only using some analytics, it's very important, but also designing trainings, looking for the partnership, international, and keeping it probably in some, strategic common framework for the country and for the system. Probably it can be very important role for non-state actors who is ready, to work with this implementation and introducing any new standards for the country or for jurisdiction.
Thank you, Vasilina. Thank you, Yuriy, and thank you, Denys, for your intervention. I think also we learned a lot from you. And I would give now the floor to the ambassador for the passing floor to the last.
Thank you so much, and Eva, and thank you to all the panelists. And then I'm really pleased to without further ado, give the floor for the final comment by Mr. Gisle Convik from the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights, please.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you to the Norwegian delegation to the Council of Europe for welcoming us. We're a bit new to the Council in our centre, so we're learning as we go along, and we're looking forward to increasing and continuing cooperation with the Council of Europe on the work that we do in Ukraine, but also elsewhere in the member states. And of course, thank you so much to our Ukrainian friends and colleagues. It's good to see you. I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks in Kiev. I was sitting here listening to you, and I'm not going to say too many things because I think you said all the important things. But watching the news every day is kind of despairing these days. But then again, this is something that gives us encouragement and a bit of hope. And I think what it illustrates, and you've touched upon this in so many different ways, is that human rights and security are not anathema. This whole concept is that safeguards protect individuals' rights, but it also protects evidence. And that can facilitate a democratic state monopoly on violence that will serve its citizens to a much greater extent than it so far has in all our countries. And it's a sort of never-ending endeavor that we just have to keep plugging away at. And I think that this field of investigative interviewing, when we started working with this about 15 years ago, one of the things that we discovered was, of course, that an international rules-based order does not immediately translate into rules-based behavior. For that, we need positive guidance. And this is also something that we've heard from our Ukrainian friends and colleagues, along with also friends and colleagues in more than 50 countries that are implementing in different ways and different stages the whole practice of investigative interviewing. And I think also it's worth mentioning that as we see all these countries coming online, we have a good example of our Ukrainian friends and colleagues working with our Brazilian friends and colleagues on also designing impact assessment tools, so that in the years to come, we will have a lot more research about how this impacts criminal justice in general and investigations in particular, because there's a lot of anecdotal, very interesting evidence out there. There's a lot of data that is also very, very promising. But I look really much forward to continuing the work also on the impact assessments and see what that will yield, because I know that the results will be good and that it's something that we can all learn a great deal from. So with that, I thank you all very much for coming and listening to us. And thank you, Yuriy, Vasilina, Denys, for joining us online. And looking forward to see you very, very soon. So thank you all.